Okay, hello and welcome back to another episode of 100 Years of Solitude. Today I'll be covering the Chapter 14 recap and Chapter 15. We're getting very close to the end. I think there's something like 20 chapters total. But we may be closer than even that to the end. Let's see if I can look it up by chapter. That might be faster than clicking through. Okay. All right, chapter 14. Here we go. And this is the recap taken from litcharts.com. Emme's last vacations home occur while Colonel Aureliano Buendia is still being mourned. Fernanda and Aureliano Segundo have given birth to a new daughter named Amaranta Ursula. Meme receives her diploma as a clavicordist, and her dedicated skill in this regard is a surprising counterpoint to her otherwise frivolous nature. Her passionless playing is focused on antiquated melodies that put audiences to sleep. And though her mother invites all the town's newcomers to hear Meme play in the hopes of attracting her a suitor, no match is found. Only when Amaranta dies is Meme able to stop playing the clavichord. I believe it should be is, not as. I think that's a typo on the lit charts page. Yeah, she stops when Amaranta dies, I think is what they mean to write, whoever wrote this. Meme's real joy lives in being social, gossiping and partying, and seeing movies with her father. After her second vacation home, she had realized that her father staying at home was only a ruse played out for her benefit. Meme returns home one night, drunk and ready to tell off her mother and Amaranta, but instead she lies, telling them how much she loves them, a lie that Amaranta sees through but Fernanda falls for. When Meme wakes later, sick with a hangover, Fernanda calls the doctor and makes Meme stay in bed for close to a week, though Ursula is wise to Meme's true ailment. Aureliano Segundo can tell what Meme is suffering from, and he recommits to spending more time with her. Meme, similar to Amaranta, is not beautiful, but she is friendly and fun. Aureliano Segundo spoils Meme, redecorating her bedroom and giving her as much spending money as she wants, though she takes even more out of his wallet herself. Fernanda busies herself caring for the new baby and corresponding with invisible physicians. She only cares that Aureliano Segundo never take Meme to Pedro Cortez's house. Pedro Cortez, however, wants nothing to do with the girl, threatened by Aureliano Segundo's affection for her. So Pedro Cortez and Fernanda are seeing eye to eye on that, it seems like. Among Meme's friends are 3 American girls from the other side of the tracks, one of whom is the daughter of Mr. Brown. Meme is invited to Saturday dances, the only ones where natives and Americans mingle. Fernanda is appalled that her daughter goes to these dances, but Ursula sees no issue. Meme is invited to play the clavichord for the Americans, and after that, she is also invited to Sunday pool parties and lunch once a week. She takes to the interests of the Americans, even learning English. Aureliano Segundo, proud, buys Meme a 6-volume English encyclopedia. She spends the time she once spent gossiping, poring over the encyclopedia, seeing her foreign ways as juvenile and regaling Aureliano Segundo with the story of her drunken night. She tells him she liked a red-headed American boy visiting on vacation who had already returned home with his family. Aureliano Segundo returns to Pedro Cortez. Amaranta continues to sew her shroud. The invisible doctors diagnose Fernanda with a tumor in her large intestine and schedule a telepathic operation. The death of Amaranta causes new upheaval. No one in the family has had any idea as to Amaranta's true personality. She has deprived herself of romance and happiness, suppressing her desires until she nearly acts out on them with her nephews. The way that Colonel Aureliano Buendia thought about his war until his death is the way that Amaranta thinks of her adopted sister Rebecca. She prays that she will not die before Rebecca. And on one afternoon, years ahead of time, she's warned that she should begin sewing her shroud on the 6th of the following April and that she will die on the day it's completed. Several years later, a week ahead of time, she calculates that she will take the last stitch on the night of February 4th, but a power outage prevents her from finishing. She completes her work on the morning of the 5th and announces that she will die at dusk. She offers to take letters to the dead for everyone in town. She calls for a carpenter so she can be measured for a coffin and asks that letters be buried with her. Father Antonio Isabel arrives to deliver last rites to Amaranta, who still seems perfectly well. He asks Amaranta to confess, but she says that her conscience is clean. Fernanda asks what sin could be so bad that she declines to admit it even now. But Amaranta only makes Ursula sweat to her virginity. The writer might have meant swear there. I'm not sure. Maybe it actually means sweat, but it seems like that's not the best meaning, right? Amy plays a concert that night, and in the middle of her piece, someone interrupts her to tell her her aunt has died. The show is ended. After the 9 nights of mourning, Ursula goes to bed and does not get up again. Santa Sofia de la Piedad takes care of her. From bed, Ursula teaches little Amaranta Ursula to read. Ursula is still doing what she can for the house. Miraculously, she's doing it even with cataracts in her eyes, almost completely blind. With all her time to silently observe and meditate, Ursula senses that Meme is upset and asks what is wrong, but Meme laughs off the question. One night, Meme says that she's going to the movies with Aureliano Segundo, but Fernanda hears him playing the accordion. Fernanda goes to the theater and sees Meme kissing a man. Fernanda escorts Meme home, and the following day, a young mechanic for the banana company appears, trailed by yellow butterflies, to inquire about Meme. His name is Mauricio Babylonia. In flashback, we learn that Meme was made aware of the young man sometime before. She's bothered by him enough that she shows up in her dreams. The dream causes her to take an interest in him. When she sees him next, she's nervous to talk to him at the movies. She looks for an excuse to go visit him at work. You can tell she's interested. She's mortified at the transparency of her efforts. She recognizes that the yellow butterflies always precede his appearance. When Mauricio Babylonia visits the house to deliver a package for Meme's friend, Fernanda knows only that she can tell by his face he's going to die. When Meme opens the package inside, she finds a note from Mauricio Babylonia saying they'll meet at the movies on Saturday. That night, he sits down beside her at the theater. She becomes obsessed and will do anything to spend time with him. She visits Pilar Trinera to have her fortune told, not knowing the woman is her great-grandmother. Pilar offers Meme the use of her bed so that she might be united with Mauricio. Amaranta's death postpones this possibility. On the first evening she is able, she arranges to meet Mauricio Babylonia at Pilar Trinera's. Meme and Mauricio Babylonia make love twice a week for 3 months. On the night Fernanda catches the young couple kissing in the theater, Aureliano Segundo asks Meme to tell him what's going on, but she refuses. He believes their bond has been severed. For 2 months, Meme is confined to her room, seemingly unaffected. Ursula notes, though, that Meme takes a bath at night now. At night, the yellow butterflies arrive to the house. Fernanda tries to kill them, claiming butterflies at night are bad luck. Fernanda discovers the mustard plaster that Meme has been using as a contraceptive one night, requests a guard be stationed outside her daughter's window the next day. The guards shoot Mauricio Babylonia as he tries to crawl through the bathroom roof, paralyzing him. He dies of old age alone many years later. Okay, that was chapter 14. Meme she's like Amaranta. I mean, is that true? Is she like Amaranta at all? I don't think so. I think she's like her father, right? She's like Aureliano Segundo. And through Cloud Court, she's somewhat like Aureliano. Colonel Aureliano Segundo, sorry, not Colonel Aureliano Segundo, Colonel Aureliano Buendia, with his like goldfishes, or when he was practicing his craft. Among the female characters, I think Meme is most like Remedios, actually. And not the beautiful Remedios, the one that died trying to give birth to twins. I think she's most like that character. Like if Remedios and Aureliano Segundo fused together somehow, like the partying tendencies of Aureliano Segundo and Remedios' love for her husband. I think that would be like Meme. Yeah, I don't think she's like Ursula at all, and I don't think she's like Amaranta at all. And she's definitely not like Fernanda. The events that would deal Macondo its fatal blow were just showing themselves when they brought Meme Bundi's son home. And also, she's also not like Remedios the Beauty. She's not like Remedios the Beauty at all. The public situation was so uncertain then that no one had sufficient spirit to become involved with private scandals, so that Fernando was able to count on an atmosphere that enabled her to keep the child hidden as if he had never existed. Is he going to be named Aureliano the Third? Aureliano the Third? I don't know. She had to take him in because the circumstances under which they brought him made rejection impossible. She had to tolerate him against her will for the rest of her life because at that moment of truth she lacked the courage to go through with her inner determination to drown him in the bathroom cistern. She locked him up in Colonel Aureliano Buendia's old workshop. She succeeded in convincing Santa Sofia de la Piedad that she had found him floating in a basket. That would be the boy's great-grandmother, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because his grandmother would be Fernanda, right? Ursula would die without ever knowing his origin. He is the son of Meme and Mauricio Babylonia. And in turn, he is Ursula's great, I think, great-great-great-grandson. If my math is right. And here I can check the chart just to make sure. Yeah, this boy is her great-great-great-grandson. 3 greats. Little Amaranta Ursula, who went into the workshop once when Fernando was feeding the child, also believed the version of the floating basket. Aureliano Segundo had been broken finally with his wife because of the irrational way in which she handled Meme's tragedy. I assume by tragedy they mean Mauricio Babylonia's tragedy, which might have by connection also been a tragedy for Meme, but that really it's Mauricio's tragedy. Did not know the existence of his grandson until 3 years after they brought him home. The child escaped from captivity through an oversight on Fernanda's part and appeared on the porch for a fraction of a second, naked with matted hair, with an impressive sex organ that was like a turkey's wattles, as if he were not a human child but the encyclopedia definition of a cannibal. Fernanda had not counted on that nasty trick of her incorrigible fate. The child was like the return of a shame that she had thought exiled by her from her house forever. As soon as they carried off Mauricio Babylonia with his shattered spinal column, Fernanda had worked out the most minute details of a plan destined to wipe out all traces of the burden. Without consulting her husband, she packed her bags, put the 3 changes of clothing that her daughter would need into a small suitcase, and went to get her in her bedroom a half hour before the train arrived. "Let's go, Renata," she told her. She gave no explanation. Meme, for her part, did not expect or want any. She not only did not know where they were going, but it would have been the same to her if they had been taking her to the slaughterhouse. She had not spoken again, nor would she do so for the rest of her life, from the time that she heard the shot in the backyard, and the simultaneous cry of pain from Mauricio Babylonia. When her mother ordered her out of the bedroom, she did not comb her hair or wash her face, and she got into the train as if she were walking in her sleep, not even noticing the yellow butterflies that were still accompanying her. Fernanda never found out, nor did she take the trouble to, whether that stony silence was a determination of her will, or whether she had become mute because of the impact of the tragedy. Meme barely took notice of the journey through the formerly enchanted region. She did not see the shady, endless banana groves on both sides of the tracks. She did not see the white houses of the gringos with their gardens, dried out by dust and heat, or the women in shorts and blue-striped shirts playing cards on the terraces. She did not see the ox carts on the dusty roads, loaded down with bunches of bananas. She did not see the girls diving into the transparent rivers like tarpons, leaving the passengers on the train with the bitterness of their splendid breasts. or the miserable huts of the workers all huddled together, where Mauricio Babylonia's yellow butterflies fluttered about, in the doorways of which there were green and squalid children sitting on their pots, pregnant women who shouted insults at the train. That fleeting vision, which had been a celebration for her when she came home from school, passed through Meme's heart without a quiver. She did not look out of the window, not even when the burning dampness of the groves ended. And the train went through a populated plain, where the carbonized skeleton of the Spanish galleon still sat, and it came out into clear air along the frothy, dirty sea where almost a century before, Jose Arcadio Buendia's illusions had met defeat. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when they had come to the last station in the swamp, she got out of the train because Fernanda made her. They got into a small carriage that looked like an enormous bat, drawn by an asthmatic horse. They went through the desolate city, in the endless streets of which, split by saltiness, there was a sound of a piano lesson just like the one that Fernanda heard during the siestas of her adolescence. They went on board a riverboat, the wooden wheel of which had a sound of conflagration, and whose rusted metal plates reverberated like the mouth of an oven. Mimi shut herself up in her cabin. Twice a day Fernanda left a plate of food by her bed, and twice a day she took it away intact. Not because Meme had resolved to die of hunger, but because even the smell of food was repugnant to her, and her stomach rejected even water. Not even she herself knew that her fertility had outwitted the mustard vapors, just as Fernanda did not know until almost a year later, when they brought the child. In the suffocating cabin, maddened by the vibration of the metal plates and the unbearable stench of the mud stirred up by the paddle wheel, Mame lost track of the days. Much time had passed when she saw the yellow butterfly destroyed in blades of the fan. She admitted as an irremediable truth that Mauricio Babylonia had died. The last yellow butterfly destroyed. She did not let herself be defeated by resignation, however. She kept thinking about him during the arduous muleback crossing of the hallucinating plateau where Aureliano II had become lost, and he was looking for the most beautiful woman who had ever appeared on the face of the earth. When they went over the mountains along Indian trails and entered the gloomy city in whose stone alleys and funereal bronze bells of 32 churches told. That night they slept in the abandoned colonial mansion on boards that Fernanda laid on the floor of a room invaded by weeds, wrapped in the shreds of curtains that they pulled off the windows and that had fallen to pieces with every turn of the body. Mimi knew where they were because, in the fright of her insomnia, she saw pass by the gentleman dressed in black, whom they delivered to the house inside a lead box on one distant Christmas Eve. On the following day after Mass, Fernanda took her to a somber building that Meme recognized immediately from her mother's stories of the convent, where they had raised her to be a queen, and she understood that they had come to the end of the journey. While Fernanda was speaking to someone in the office next door, Meme remained in a parlor checkered with large oil paintings of colonial archbishops, still wearing an Edamine dress with small black flowers and stiff high shoes, which were swollen by the cold of the uplands. She was standing in the center of the parlor, thinking about Mauricio Babylonia under the yellow stream of light from the stained glass windows, when a very beautiful novice came out of the office, carrying her suitcase with the 3 changes in clothing. She passed Mimi, took her hand without stopping. "Come, Renata," she said to her. Mimi took her hand and let herself be led. The last time that Fernanda saw her trying to keep up with the novice, the iron grating of the cloister had just closed behind her. She was still thinking about Mauricio Babylonia, his smell of grease, his halo of butterflies. She would keep on thinking about him for all the days of her life until the remote autumn morning when she died of old age, with her name changed and her head shaved, without ever having spoken a word, in a gloomy hospital in Krakow. Fernanda returned to Mocondo on a train protected by armed police. During the trip, she noted the tension of the passengers, the military preparations in the towns along the line, and an atmosphere rarefied by the certainty that something serious was going to happen. She had no information until she reached Mocondo. They told her that Jose Arcadio II was inciting the workers of the banana company to strike. That's all we need. Let's see if I can pull this center. There we go. That's all we need, Fernanda said to herself, an anarchist in the family. I mean, she's been married to Jose Arcadio II for how many years now? Like 10, 15, 20? She still doesn't know who he is. Like, he's always been more wild, less reserved in comparison to Fernanda. So why would she be surprised at this point at all? Like, with the exception of maybe Petra Cortez, she should know him better than anyone. strike broke out 2 weeks later and it did not have the dramatic consequences that had been feared. The workers demanded that they not be obliged to cut and load bananas on Sundays, and the position seemed so just that even Father Antonio Isabel interceded in its favor because he found it in accordance with the laws of God. That victory, along with other actions that were initiated during the following months, drew the colorless Jose Arcadio Segundo out of his anonymity. People had been accustomed to say that he was only good for filling up the town with French whores. The same impulsive decision with which he had auctioned off his fighting cocks, in order to organize a harebrained boat business. He gave up his position as foreman in the banana company, took the side of the workers. Quite soon he was pointed out as the agent of an international conspiracy against public order. One night during the course of a week, darkened by somber rumors, he miraculously escaped 4 revolver shots taken at him by an unknown party as he was leaving a secret meeting. The atmosphere of the following months was so tense that even Ursula perceived it in her dark corner. She had the impression that once more she was living through the dangerous times when her son Aureliano carried the homeopathic pills of subversion in his pocket. That must be Colonel Aureliano Buendia. She tried to speak to Jose Arcadio Segundo to let him know that precedent, but Aureliano Segundo told her that since the night of the attempt on his life, no one knew his whereabouts. Just like Aureliano, Ursula exclaimed. It's as if the world were repeating itself. Fernanda was immune to the uncertainty of those days. She had no contact with the outside world since the violent altercation she had with her husband over her having decided Meme's fate without his consent. Yeah, they never saw eye to eye. Meme either. Aureliano Segundo was prepared to rescue his daughter with the help of the police if necessary, but Fernanda showed him some papers that were proof that she had entered the convent of her own free will. Meme had indeed signed once she was already behind the iron grating, and she did it with the same indifference with which she had allowed herself to be led away. Underneath it all, Aureliano Segundo did not believe in the legitimacy of the proof, just as he never believed that Mauricio Babylonia had gone to the yard to steal the chickens, but both expedients served to ease his conscience. Thus, he could go back without remorse under the shadow of Pedro Cortez, where he revived his noisy revelry and unlimited gormandizing. Foreign to the restlessness of the town, deaf to Ursula's quiet predictions, Fernanda gave the last turn to the screw of her preconceived plan. She wrote a long letter to her son Jose Arcadio, who was then about to take his first orders. In it, she told him that his sister Renata had expired in the peace of the Lord, as a consequence of the black vomit. Then she put Amaranta's Ursula under the care of Santa Sofia de la Piedad and dedicated herself to organizing her correspondence with the invisible doctors, which had been upset by Meme's trouble. The first thing that she did was to set a definite date for the postponed telepathic operation. But the invisible doctors answered her that it was not wise so long as the state of social agitation continued in Macondo. She was so urgent and so poorly informed that she explained to them in another letter that there was no such state of agitation, that everything was the result of the lunacy of a brother-in-law of hers who was fiddling around at that time in that labor union nonsense just as he'd been involved with the cockfighting riverboats before. They were still not in agreement on the hot Wednesday when an aged nun knocked at the door bearing a small basket on her arm. When she opened the door, Santa Sofia de la Piedad thought it was a gift, tried to take the small basket that was covered with a lovely lace wrap. The nun stopped her because she had instructions to give it personally and with strictest secrecy to Doña Fernanda del Carpio de Buendia. It was Meme's son. Fernanda's former spiritual director explained to her in a letter that he had been born 2 months before and that they had taken the privilege of baptizing him Aureliano for his grandfather. I knew it. So many Aurelianos. Okay. His grandfather would have been Aureliano Segundo, as a matter of fact. His mother would not open her lips to tell them her wishes. What would she have named her son instead? Mauricio, perhaps? Hang on, let me take a look. I told them that we found him floating in the basket, she said, smiling. Well, Fernanda rose up inside against that trick of fate, but she had sufficient strength to hide it in front of the nun. Let's see. That hasn't been the case, right? Every boy in the family has always been named after their father. It's a little bit confusing because there haven't been any women in the family. There haven't been any daughters in the family who had sons and daughters of their own. It's practically all boys in this family. Like, there was Colonel Aureliano Buendia and then Jose Arcadio. They're the ones who had sons, Aureliano Jose and Arcadio, and Aurelianos, of course, who we didn't hardly hear or see from. I think Aurelianos had like one of the shortest. He's all but been forgotten. I don't think he ever actually even died, Aurelianos. Oh, wait. I see. Those are the 17 sons. Okay, so that makes sense. Santa Sofia was not from the family. That's the thing. Remedios was, but Remedios did not have any kids. Okay. Yeah, actually, yeah. With the exception of Ursula, Meme is the first woman in the family to have a child. And all of Ursula's kids were named after Jose Arcadio Buendia, with the exception of Amaranta. So yeah. I don't know what Meme would have named her son otherwise. I don't know. Maybe Mauricio, but she didn't say anything. We'll tell them that we found him floating in the basket, she said, smiling. No one will believe it, the nun said. If they believe it in the Bible, Fernanda replied, I don't see why they shouldn't believe it from me. The nun lunched at the house while she waited for the train back. In accordance with the discretion they asked of her, she did not mention the child again, but Fernanda viewed her as undesirable witness of her shame and lamented the fact that they had abandoned the medieval custom of hanging a messenger who bore bad news. It was then that she decided to drown the child in the cistern as soon as the nun left, but her heart was not strong enough, and she preferred to wait patiently until the infinite goodness of God would free her from the annoyance. These chapters are long. Got like 10 more pages. So yeah, about 10 more pages. New Aureliano was a year old when the tension of the people broke with no forewarning. Jose Arcadio Segundo and other union leaders who had remained underground until then suddenly appeared one weekend and organized demonstrations in towns throughout the Banana region. The police merely maintained public order, but on Monday night the leaders were taken from their homes and sent to jail in the capital of the province with 2-pound irons on their legs. Taken among them were Jose Arcadio Segundo and Lorenzo Gavilan, colonel in the Mexican Revolution, exiled in Macondo, who said that he had been witness to the heroism of his comrade Artemio Cruz. They were set free, however, within 3 months because of the fact that the government and the Banana Company could not reach an agreement as to who should feed them in jail. The protests of the workers this time were based on the lack of sanitary facilities in their living quarters, the non-existence of medical services, and terrible working conditions. They stated furthermore that they were not being paid in real money but in scrip, which was good only to buy Virginia ham in the company commissaries. Jose Arcadio Segundo was put in jail because he revealed that the scrip system was a way for the company to finance its fruit ships. Without the commissary, merchandise would have to return empty from New Orleans to the banana ports. The other complaints were common knowledge. The company physicians did not examine the sick, but had them lined up behind one another in dispensaries, and a nurse who put a pill in the color of copper sulfate on their tongues, whether they had malaria, gonorrhea, or constipation. It was a cure that was so common that children would stand in line several times and instead of swallowing the pills, would take them home to use as bingo markers. The company workers were crowded together in miserable barracks. The engineers, instead of putting in toilets, had a portable latrine for every 50 people. Brought to the camps at Christmas time, they held demonstrations of how to use them so that they would last longer. The decrepit lawyers dressed in black, who during the older times had besieged Colonel Aureliano Buendia and who now were controlled by the Banana Company, dismissed those demands with decisions that seemed like acts of magic. When workers drew up a list of unanimous petitions, a long time passed before they were able to notify the Banana Company officially. As soon as he found out about the agreement, Mr. Brown hitched his luxurious Glass-Stein coach to the train and disappeared from Condo along with the more prominent representatives of his company. Nonetheless, some workers found one of them the following Saturday in a brothel, and they made him sign a copy of the sheet that demands that he was naked with the woman who had helped to entrap him. The mournful lawyers showed in court that the man had nothing to do with the company, and in order that no one doubt their arguments, had him jailed as an impostor. Later on, Mr. Brown was surprised traveling incognito in a third-class coach, and they made him sign another copy of the demands. The following day, he appeared before the judges with his hair dyed black and speaking flawless Spanish. The lawyers showed that the man was not Mr. Jack Brown, superintendent of the Banana Company, born in Prattville, Alabama, but a harmless vendor of medicinal plants, born in Macondo and baptized here with the name of Dagoberta Fonseca. While later faced with a new attempt by the workers, the lawyers publicly exhibited Mr. Brown's death certificate, tested to by consuls and foreign ministers, which bore witness that on June 9th last he had been run over by a fire engine in Chicago. Tired of that hermeneutical delirium, the workers turned away from the authorities in Macondo and brought their complaints up to the higher courts. It was there that the sleight of hand lawyers proved that the demands lacked all validity for the simple reason that the Banana Company did not have, never would have any workers in its service, because they were all hired on a temporary and occasional basis. So that the fable of the Virginia ham was nonsense, the same as that of the miraculous pills and the Yuletide toilets. By decision of the court, it was established and set down in solemn decrees that the workers did not exist. The great strike broke out. Cultivation stopped halfway. The fruit rotted on the trees. 120-car trains remained on the sidings. The idle workers overflowed the towns. The Street of the Turks echoed with the Saturday. It lasted for several days. In the pool room at the Hotel Jacob, they had to arrange 24-hour shifts. That was where Jose Arcadio Segundo was on the day it was announced that the army had been assigned to reestablish public order. He was not a man given to omens. The news was like an announcement of death that had been waiting for ever since that distant morning when Colonel Jaranello Marquez had let him see an execution. The bad omen did not change his solemnity, however. He took the shot he had planned, and it was very good. A short time later, the drum beats, the shrill of the bugle, the shouting and running of the people told him not only had the game of pool come to an end, but also the silent and solitary game that he had been playing with himself ever since that dawn execution. Then he went out into the street and saw them. There were 3 regiments, whose march in time to a galley drum made the earth tremble. The snorting of many-headed dragons filled the glow of noon with a pestilential vapor. They were short, stocky, and brute-like. They perspired with the sweat of a horse and had a smell of sun-tanned hide. Taciturn and impenetrable perseverance of men from the uplands. It took them over an hour to pass by. One might have thought that they were only a few squads marching in a circle because they were all identical, sons of the same bitch. With the same stolidity, they all bore the weight of their packs and canteens, the shame of their rifles and fixed bayonets, the chancre of blind obedience, sense of honor. Ursula heard them pass from their beds in the shadows. She made cross with her fingers. Santa Sofia de la Piedad existed for an instant. Leaning over the embroidered tablecloth that she had just ironed, she thought of her son, Jose Arcadio Segundo, who, without changing expression, watched the last soldiers pass by the door of the Hotel Jacob. Martial law enabled the army to assume the functions of arbitrator in this controversy. No effort at conciliation was made. As soon as they appeared in Macondo, the soldiers put aside their rifles and cut and loaded the bananas and started the trains running. The workers who had been content to wait until then went into the woods. No other weapons but their working machetes, and they began to sabotage the sabotage. They burned plantations and commissaries, tore up tracks to impede the passage of trains that began to operate their path with machine gun fire. The cut telegraph and telephone wires. The irrigation ditches were stained with blood. Mr. Brown, who was alive in the electrified chicken coop, was taken out of Macondo with his family and those of his fellow countrymen and brought to a safe place under the protection of the army. The situation was threatening to lead to a bloody and unequal civil war when the authorities called upon the workers to gather in Macondo. The summons announced that the civil and military leader of the province would arrive on the following Friday, ready to intercede in the conflict. Jose Arcadio Segundo was in the crowd that had gathered in the station on Friday since early morning. He had taken part in a meeting of union leaders and had been commissioned, along with Colonel Gavilan, to mingle in the crowd and orient it according to how things went. He did not feel well, and a salty pace was beginning to collect on his palate when he noticed that the army had set up machine gun placements around the small square and that the wired city of the Banana Company was protected by artillery pieces. Around 12 o'clock, waiting for a train that was not arriving, more than 3,000 people, workers, women, and children, had spilled out of the open space in front of the station, were pressing into the neighboring streets, which the army had closed off with rows of machine guns. At that time, it all seemed more like a jubilant fair than a waiting crowd. They had brought over the fritter and drink stands from the street of the Turks. People were in good spirits. They bore the tedium of waiting in the scorching sun. A short time before 3 o'clock, the rumor spread that the official train would not arrive until the following day. The crowd let out a sigh of disappointment. An army lieutenant then climbed up onto the roof of the station where there were 4 machine gun emplacements, aiming at the crowd and called for silence. Next to Jose Arcadio Segundo, there was a barefooted woman, very fat, with 2 children between the ages of 4 and 7. She was carrying the smaller one, and she asked Jose Arcadio Segundo, without knowing him, if he would lift up the other one so that he could hear better. Jose Arcadio Segundo put the child on his shoulders. Many years later, that child would still tell to the disbelief of all that he had seen the lieutenant reading Decree Number 4 of the civil military leader of the province through an old phonograph horn. Had been signed by General Carlos in 3 articles of 80 words. He declared the strikers to be a bunch of hoodlums. He authorized the army to shoot to kill. After the decree was read, in the midst of a deafening hoot of protest, the captain took the place of the lieutenant in the roof of the station. With a horn, he signaled that he wanted to speak. The crowd was quiet again. The redoubled hooting and shouting drowned out the bugle call that announced the start of the count. No one moved. 5 minutes had passed. The captain said in the same tone, "1 more minute and we'll open fire." Jose Arcadio Segundo, sweating ice, lowered the child and gave him to the woman. "Those bastards might just shoot," she murmured. Jose Arcadio Segundo did not have time to speak because at that instant he recognized the hoarse voice of Colonel Gavilan, echoing the words of the woman with a shout. Intoxicated by the tension, by the miraculous depth of the silence, furthermore convinced that nothing could move, that crowd, held tight in a fascination with death, Jose Arcadio Segundo raised himself up over the heads in front of him. For the first time in his life, he raised his voice. "You bastards!" he shouted. "Take the extra minute and stick it up your ass." After his shout, something happened that did not bring on a fight, but a kind of hallucination. The captain gave the order to fire. 14 machine guns answered at once. But it all seemed like a farce. It was as if the machine guns had been loaded with caps, because their panting rattle could be heard and their incandescent spitting could be seen, but not the slightest reaction was perceived, not a cry, not even a sigh among the compact crowd that seemed petrified by the instantaneous invulnerability. Suddenly on one side, a sea of death tore open. A cry of death tore open the enchantment. Mother. A seismic voice, a volcanic breath, the roar of a cataclysm broke out in the center of the crowd with a great potential of expansion. Jose Arcadio Segundo barely had time to pick up the child while the other one was swallowed up by the crowd that swirled about in panic. Many years later, that child would still tell, in spite of people thinking that he was a crazy old man, how Jose Arcadio Segundo had lifted him over his head and hauled him, almost in the air, as if floating on the terror of the crowd, toward a nearby street. I'm just tired. That's why I'm feeling drowsy. His child's privileged position allowed him to see at that moment that the wild mass was starting to get to the corner and the row of machine guns opened fire. Several voices shouted at the same time, "Get down! Get down!" People in front had already done so, swept down by the wave of bullets. Survivors, instead of getting down, tried to go back to the small square. The panic became a dragon's tail as one compact wave ran against another, which was moving in the opposite direction, toward the other dragon's tail. In the street across the way, where the machine guns were also firing without cease. They were penned in, swirling about in a gigantic whirlwind that little by little was being reduced to its epicenter. At the edges, were systematically being cut off all around like an onion, being peeled by the insatiable and medical shears of the machine guns. The child saw a woman kneeling with her arms in the shape of a cross in an open space, mysteriously free from the stampede. Jose Arcadio Segundo put him up there at the moment he fell, with his face bathed in blood. Before the colossal troop wiped out the empty space, the kneeling woman, the light of the high, drought-stricken sky, the whorish world where Ursula Iguaran had sold so many little candy animals. Just keeps going on and on. It's chapter 15. It's a headache. Jose Arcadio came to, he was lying face up in darkness. He realized that he was riding on an endless and silent train, that his head was caked with dry blood, and that all his bones ached. He felt an intolerable desire to sleep. Prepared to sleep for many hours, safe from the terror and the horror, he made himself comfortable on the side that pained him less. Only then did he discover that he was lying against dead people. There was no free space in the car except for an aisle in the middle. Several hours must have passed since the massacre because the corpses had the same temperature as the plaster and aluminum, the same consistency of petrified foam, that had those who put them in the car had time to pile them up the same way in which they transported bunches of bananas. Trying to flee from the nightmare, Jose Arcadio Segundo dragged himself from one car to another in the direction in which the train was heading. The flashes of light that broke through the wooden slats as they went through sleeping towns. He saw the man corpses. The sentence is not grammatically correct, but okay. Women corpses, child corpses who would be thrown into the sea like rejected bananas. He recognized only a woman who sold drinks in the square, and Colonel Gavilan, who still held wrapped in his hand the belt with a buckle of Morelia's silver, with which he had tried to open his way through the panic. He got to the first car, he jumped into the darkness and lay beside the tracks until the train had passed. It was the longest one he'd ever seen, with almost 200 freighted cars, a locomotive at either end, and a third one in the middle. It had no lights, but not even the red and green running lights. It slipped with a nocturnal, stealthy velocity. Top of the cars, there could be seen the dark shapes of the soldiers with their unplaced machine guns. Again, like, the wars are tedious, all the political stuff. I really wish Gabriel would have just cut that out of the book, because it's like, I don't care about all the wars. I don't care about all the battles. I don't care about upheaval, people going on strike. Like, I really don't care. After a minute, a torrential cloudburst came up. Jose Arcadio Segundo did not know where it was that he had jumped off, but he knew that by going in the opposite direction to that of the train, he would reach Macondo. After walking for more than 3 hours, soaked to the skin with a terrible headache, he was able to make out the first houses in the light of dawn. Attracted by the smell of coffee, he went into a kitchen where a woman with a child in her arms was leaning over the stove. "Hello," he said, exhausted. "Jose Arcadio Segundo Buendia." He pronounced his whole name letter by letter in order to convince her that he was still alive. He was wise in doing so because the woman had thought that he was an apparition, as she saw the dirty, shadowy figure with his head and clothing dirty with blood, touched with the solemnity of death, come through the door. She recognized him. She brought him a blanket so that he could wrap himself up while his clothes dried by the fire. She warmed some water to wash his wounds, which was only a flesh wound. She gave him a clean diaper to bandage his head. She gave him a mug of coffee without sugar, as she had been told that Buendias drank it. She spread his clothing out near the fire. Jose Arcadio Segundo did not speak until he had finished drinking his coffee. "There must have been 3,000 of them," he murmured. "What? The dead," he clarified. "It must have been all the people who were at the station." The woman measured him with a pitying look. "There haven't been any dead here," she said. "Since the time of your uncle, the colonel. Nothing has happened at Macondo." In the 3 kitchens where Jose Arcadio Segundo stopped before reaching home, they told him the same thing. There weren't any dead. He went through the small square by the station, and he saw the fritter stands piled one on top of the other. He could still find no trace of the massacre. The streets were deserted under the persistent rain, and the house was locked up with no trace of the life inside. The only human note was the first tolling of the bell for Mass. He knocked at the door at Colonel Gavilan's house. A pregnant woman whom he had seen several times closed the door in his face. He left, she said, frightened. He went back to his own country. The main entrance to the wire chicken coop was guarded as always by 2 local policemen who looked as if they were made of stone in the rain. Raincoats and rubber boots. To Marginal Street, the West Indian Negroes were singing their Saturday psalms. Jose Arcadio Segundo jumped over the courtyard wall and entered the house through the kitchen. Santa Sofia de La Piedad barely raised her voice. "Don't let Fernanda see you," she said. "She's just getting up." As if she were fulfilling an implicit pact, she took her son to the chamber pot room. A range of milk cades broken down cot for him, and at 2 in the afternoon, while Fernanda was taking her siesta, she passed a plate of food into him through the window. Liliano Segundo slept at home because the rain had caught him there, and at 3 in the afternoon, he was still waiting for it to clear. 2 more pages. Jeez, this chapter. It's like... Liliano Segundo had slept at home because the rain had caught him there, and at 3 in the afternoon, he was still waiting for it to clear. Informed in secret by Santa Sofia de la Piedad, he visited his brother in Milkcade's room at that time. He did not believe the version of the massacre or the nightmare trip of the train loaded with corpses traveling toward the sea either. The night before, he had read an extraordinary proclamation to the nation, which said that the workers had left the station and had returned home in peaceful groups. The proclamation also stated that the union leaders with great patriotic spirit had reduced their demands to 2 points: the reform of medical services and the building of latrines in the living quarters. It stated later that when the military authorities obtained the agreement with the workers, they hastened to tell Mr. Brown. Not only accepted the new conditions, but offered to pay for 3 days of public festivities to celebrate the end of the conflict. Common sense. Really. Did anyone really have to go through a strike for those things? I don't think so. It didn't seem to me like any of it was really necessary, but maybe that's the point. Except that when the military asked him on what date they could announce the signing of the agreement, he looked out the window at the sky, crossed with lightning flashes, and made a profound gesture of doubt. "When the rain stops," he said. "As long as the rain lasts, we're suspending all activities." It had not rained for 3 months. There had been a drought. But when Mr. Brown announced his decision, a torrential downpour spread over the whole banana region. It was the one that caught Jose Arcadio Segundo on his way to Macondo. A week later, it was still raining. The official version, repeated 1,000 times and mingled out all over the country by every means of communication. The government found it at hand. It was finally accepted. There was no debt. The satisfied workers had gone back to their families. The banana company was suspending all activity until the rain stopped. Martial law continued with an eye to the necessity of taking emergency measures for the public disaster of the endless downpour. The troops were confined to quarters. During the day, the soldiers walked through the torrents in the streets with their pant legs rolled up, playing with boats with the children. The night after taps, they knocked doors down with their rifle butts, hauled suspects out of their beds, took them off on trips from which there was no return. The search for and extermination of the hoodlums, murderers, arsonists, and rebels of Decree No. 4 was still going on. The military denied it even to the relatives of the victims who crowned the commandant's offices in search of news. "You must have been dreaming," the officers insisted. "Nothing has happened in Macondo. Nothing has ever happened. Nothing ever will happen. This is a happy town." That way they were finally able to wipe out the union leaders. The only survivor was Jose Arcadio Segundo. On February night, the unmistakable blows of rifle butts were heard at the door. Aureliano Segundo, who was still waiting for it to clear, opened the door to 6 soldiers under the commanding officer. Soaking from the rain without saying a word, they searched the house by room, closet by closet, from parlor to pantry. Ursula woke up when they turned on the light in her room. She did not breathe while the search went on, but held her fingers in the shape of a cross, pointing them to where the soldiers were moving about. Santa Sofia de la Piedad managed to warn Jose Arcadio Segundo, who was sleeping in Melchior's room. He could see that it was too late to try to escape. So Santa Sofia de la Piedad locked the door again, and he put on his shirt and his shoes and sat down on the cot to wait for them. That moment they were searching the gold workshop. The officer made them open the padlock. With the sweep of his lantern, he saw the workbench and the glass cupboard with bottles of acid and instruments that were still there, where the owner had left them. He seemed to understand that no one lived in that room. He wisely asked Aureliano Segundo if he was a silversmith, however, and the latter explained to him that it had been in Colonel Aureliano Buendia's workshop. Oh, the officer said, turned on the lights and ordered such a minute search that they did not miss the 18 little goldfishes that had not been melted down, that were hidden behind the bottles in their tin can. The officer examined them one by one on the workbench, and then he turned human. I'd like to take one, if I may, he said. At one time they were a mark of subversion, but now they're relics. He was young, almost an adolescent, with no sign of timidity and with a natural pleasant manner that had not shown itself until then. Aureliano Segundo gave him a little fish. The officer put it in his shirt pocket with a childlike glow in his eyes, and he put the others back in the can and set it back where it had been. It's a wonderful memento, he said. Colonel Aureliano Buendia was one of our greatest men. Nevertheless, that surge of humanity did not alter his professional conduct. Unlike Cade's room, which was locked up again with a padlock, Santa Sofia de la Piedad tried to amass hope. No one has lived in that room for a century, she said. The officer had opened it and flashed the beam of the lantern over it, and Aureliano Segundo and Santa Sofia de la Piedad saw the Arab eyes of Jose Arcadio Segundo at the moment when the ray of light passed over his face. They understood that it was the end of one anxiety and the beginning of another, which would find relief only in resignation. The officer continued examining the room with the lantern. He showed no sign of interest until he discovered the 72 chamber pots piled up in the cupboards. He turned on the light. Jose Arcadio Segundo was sitting on the edge of the cot, ready to go, more solemn and pensive than ever. Background were the shelves with the shredded books, the rolls of parchment, the clean and orderly work table with the ink still fresh in the inkwells. There was the same pureness in the air, the same clarity, the same respite from dust and destruction that Aureliano Segundo had known in childhood, and only Colonel Aureliano Buendia could not perceive. But the officer was only interested in the chamber pots. How many people live in this house? He asked. 5. The officer obviously did not understand. He paused with his glance on the space where Aureliano Segundo and Santa Sofia de la Piedad were still seeing Jose Arcadio Segundo, and the latter also recognized that the soldier was looking at him without seeing him. The people are no longer there. That's why the pots are in that room. He turned out the light and closed the door. He spoke to the soldiers. Aureliano Segundo understood that the young officer had seen the room with the same eyes as Colonel Aureliano Buendia. It's obvious that no one has been in that room for at least 100 years, the officer said to the soldiers. There must be snakes in there. The door closed. Jose Arcadio Segundo was sure that the war was over. Years before, Colonel Aureliano Buendia had spoken to him about the fascination of war and had tried to show it to him with countless examples drawn from his own experiences. He believed him, but the night when the soldiers looked at him without seeing him, while he thought about the tension of the past few months, the misery of jail, the panic at the station, the train loaded with dead people, Jose Arcadio Segundo reached the conclusion that Colonel Aureliano Buendia was nothing but a faker or an imbecile. He could not understand why he needed so many words to explain what he felt in war, because one was enough. Fear. Pride and fear is completely pointless. That's been the point. There's no point to any of this conflict. No point at all. No kid's room, on the other hand, protected by the supernatural light, by the sound of the rain, by the feeling of being invisible. He found the repose that he had not had for one single instant during his previous life. The only fear that remained was that they would bury him alive. He told Santa Sofia de la Piedad about it when she brought him his daily meals, and she promised to struggle to stay alive, even beyond her natural forces, in order to make sure that they would bury him dead. Free from all fear, Jose Arcadio Segundo dedicated himself then to pursue the manuscripts of Melquiades many times, with so much more pleasure than when he could not understand them. He became accustomed to the sound of the rain, which after 2 months had become another form of silence. The only thing that disturbed his solitude was the coming and going of Santa Sofia de la Piedad. He asked her, therefore, to leave the meals on the windowsill and padlock the door. The rest of the family forgot about him, including Fernanda, who did not mind leaving him there when she found out that the soldiers had seen him without recognizing him. After 6 months of enclosure since the soldiers had left Macondo, Aureliano Segundo removed the padlock, looking for someone he could talk to until the rain stopped. As soon as he opened the door, he felt the pestilential attack of the chamber pots, which were placed on the floor and all of which had been used several times. Jose Arcadio Segundo, devoured by baldness, indifferent to the air that had been sharpened by the nauseating vapors, was still reading and rereading the unintelligible parchments. He was illuminated by a seraphic glow. He scarcely raised his eyes when he heard the door open, but that look was enough for his brothers to see repeated in it the irreparable fate of his great-grandfather. I think Colonel Aureliano Buendia is his great-grandfather. There were more than 3,000 of them, was all that Jose Arcadio Segundo said. I'm sure now that they were everybody who had been at the station. And that was not an easy chapter. Long, boring. Yes, I was totally falling asleep. Jose Arcadio Segundo. Let's see. His grandfather would have been Jose Arcadio. His great grandfather would have been Jose Arcadio Buendia, if I'm not mistaken. Great grandfather, it said. I think it must be referencing that tree that Jose Arcadio Buendia was tied to. That's the only thing I can think of. Jose Arcadio Buendia refuses to leave the tree, just as Jose Arcadio Segundo refuses to leave Melquide's room. His father's Arcadio, his grandfather's Jose Arcadio, his great grandfather's Jose Arcadio Buendia. So it must be the tree. That was chapter 15, 100 Years of Solitude. And we'll be back with the final chapter, Crime and Punishment. Thank you for watching.